In this video I've got a Sony. I've actually got two of these ones. These are probably more around the mid-90s or something. Both in pretty rough condition. KV14S1, made in Malaysia, which most of the Sonys were around that era. At least they got AV in and out. The idea of the out is just so you can loop some of them together. Whatever, one video source into one, and then you can loop it to the others, so you've got the same picture on everything. Though I don't know many people that ever use that other than things like TAB betting shops and stuff, where they could run multiple things with the same picture, maybe Kino televisions or something in pubs and that type of thing. But maybe that was the idea, to try and sell them to commercial people. One of these I had plugged in before, and I think it came up with a picture alright, and then it went dark. I think it was when I had that ZX81 computer. Originally I was trying to tune it in on something that would pick up NTSC, because these actually have, well, got front sockets as well. You've got TV system switch. Not sure if I end up finding any remotes for these, but I may have a remote somewhere because they do turn up occasionally. But I think you can do just about everything on these without the remote. Yeah, TV, video, volume program, auto program, manual program. So you should be able to do everything through the buttons. So we'll plug this one in and see if it does anything. Well, we've got a degausser. It sounds like it's coming out of standby. The standby light's flashing. Not sure if that's normal. Stop flashing now. Well, we've got channel 1. Nice looking raster there, even though it's just snow. But always looks nicer than a Trinitron. Oh, look at that. Crisp as. Nice to have something that isn't RF for a change. Look at that red. I mean, these Sonys really were nice. There's a slight bit of convergence out there. Yeah, it shows up there, a bit of red. Certainly not perfect. But the colours are absolutely stunning on these things. And who knows where the colours actually set. But they're a great little TV. Even the earlier ones, the KV1442, 1440, those sort of things gave a picture like this when they were new, but they were RF only sets, which really let them down. But the 1442 in particular was a little black one, and they were a beautiful picture on those sets. If only they had AV input, would have made them really useful as well. But unfortunately you couldn't even get much for them second hand, because they're an RF only set, and everyone wanted these sort of sets. Once the PlayStation 1 came out and the other Nintendos and stuff of that era, every kid wanted a TV with AV input. Of course you could use RF modulators. Depends what the parents' budgets were. Sometimes they buy just an old TV and you put an RF modulator on your PS1 or whatever. But obviously not as nice as this sort of thing. Now I don't know if this one's going to fade away with time. They were pretty reliable little TV, but you did see a few. The vertical dies in them, usually because the capacitor near the IC dies. They do run quite hot inside. The power supply, if this is the chassis I think it is, it's got a big flat pack chip in there, STRD. I forget what the numbers are on it, but something like that. I think it's like something 709 or something, or there was a series of them, smaller TVs used the 707 or something, and bigger ones they went up to a 9 or something, because they made a series of basically the same regulator IC, but could handle more power depending on the last digit of the number of it. They can get things like the cap on the neck board in these. I think it's on the, is it on the screen? I think it's on the screen. There's a blue capacitor, disc ceramic, and they are known for going leaky and pulling that voltage down and giving you a dark picture or no picture. I remember replacing a few of those in at least this era of Sony. Not sure if it was the portables or the big ones or both. But yeah, lovely little TV. Really got to love that Trinitron picture. And we are slightly out with the magnetisation there, probably because I've moved it around a bit. But the colours are just stunning on these TVs. Don't know why people even want a PVR really, because just these consumer sets were pretty nice. Obviously they didn't have higher res tubes in them, but they got pretty fine little phosphor dots on these consumer sets. And what have we got on the selector here? Picture, so full contrast, colour at 70, brightness at 45, sharpness at 70. I've even got bass and treble. Bit pointless with something with a little tiny speaker in there, but I guess it's a nice little extra feature. Balance. What? Why have we got balance? Pretty sure there's nothing stereo about this, and surround off. Yeah, weird. Well, it's only got mono AV, so maybe that's something shown on the menu that probably shouldn't. One push automatic programming, so that was always handy. You could just get it to search, plug it into the TV antenna and let it search right through. Can we change the system? Probably not. Or maybe that only works on the tuner mode. Let's have a look. BGI, so they're different versions of PAL. I think some of those just change the audio mode. Oh, better get out of tuning mode, I guess. I think that kind of found it on its own. Yeah, you can see a bit of rubbish on the picture. Still pretty good for RF. Probably depends a bit where I put the cables and stuff. And the pattern generator is quite close to the TV. Doesn't help. It's probably radiating a bit of rubbish in. But yeah, much better picture there. Still got a little bit of this stuff down the sides. Is not ideal. But so far this one keeps running. That'll be right. Maybe one of these was good. Unfortunately this one's also missing the door. That was pretty common on these, so a bit of a fiddly thing to tune and adjust the buttons on, I think, with that door in the way. It was often easier to pop it off, get it out of the way to do that. Well, we've got degaussing. Sounds like the horizontal just fired. So these may well be working. They're pretty dirty, like they've been stored away somewhere for a long time. Actually, I forgot to get the dust off there. Look at it, absolutely filthy. This one's on video. Yeah, running. Well, there you go. One of these should fade away. I can't remember how long it took to do it, but it did fade down to a dark picture. So I might have to get these on test and leave them running a bit. But this is pretty much identical to that other one. They had a fairly slim remote with, I think, either a green button or a green bit near the button. I think I'll have to have a dig around, because I'm pretty sure I bought at least one or two remotes for these separate from them. Yeah, nice to see the pictures are looking good on them. That's a bit lower in the colour. I thought something looked a little different. Yeah, this doesn't have any audio, so this is the same TV. So I wonder if that other one's been stuck in some other mode or for another model or something. Maybe someone's gone in there and... because I wouldn't have thought they'd bother with the audio on such a small TV with such a small speaker. And this is the same model as the other one, but it doesn't have those things coming up, so maybe someone's accidentally got in a service menu or something, or some of the weird things going on there. Let's see if this starts fading away or not. But yeah, that's as red as you'll get red. This one's got slightly better convergence, I think. Ever so slightly out, but most of these TVs you can never get them 100% perfect. But that was an acceptable standard for most people. You really didn't notice it on normal pictures. And this does have a bit of dirt on the tube, so it's a little blurry in a couple of spots. So it looks like it does scan if you just let it go. turned right up. Certainly makes the cabinet rattle a bit with that tone. And again, yeah, not as good as the composite, but it doesn't hurt to check that that's actually working. Not that it really matters much in the modern world. But yeah, that one seems pretty rock steady at the moment. So it looks like I'm going to have to give these two a bit of a run and see if one of them fades off after a while. Okay, the other TV worked quite good. This one, it did come up with like retrace, made a funny noise, came up with retrace on the screen and a bit blurry, and then came right and it's still flashing the on button a few times. Once, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Couldn't find anything in the manual about the light flashing to indicate anything, but it does flash. These do have one of those Phillips chips in it that sort of measures the, what they call it, the black current or something to the cathodes, and waits until they're warmed up a bit before unmuting the screen. They cause a lot of trouble in the Philips, I think it was the 2B chassis, big stereo TVs, where they would mute the picture as the tube aged, and it would be just stay black screen for ages. I think there might have been a mod changing some resistors or something to try and overcome that. But the TV was perfectly fine once it came on, but they would sit there sometimes and mute it. So whether it's something to do with that circuit, but this one flashes, the other one just flashes once, and then the picture comes up. So it could be maybe this tube's aged a bit or something. Didn't go dim like the first time I used this set, it seemed to slowly fade away until it was a darker picture. Now I only just ran it on snow, so maybe I need some video or something into it. Now the other good thing about these are, I think a BG1 chassis, is you can convert them to RGB really easily because they've got the option for a teletext board. And basically if you set the blanking line high and run the RGB into the, there's actually like a, or at least the holes in the board for a teletext board option, then you can put RGB into it. I looked at the circuit and there's a line from the microprocessor that basically feeds the blanking to the Philips chip as well as the teletext board, and I'm thinking if we could get this thing into teletext mode we could switch it on via remote. But I've got a few old remotes. Some of these look like they're teletext ones, so you've got text clear or something. I'm not sure how you actually change it into teletext. Oh, there. So I'm wondering, a lot of these Sony remotes have the same codes on them. I've got some newer ones, even some silver ones, which probably don't have the same codes, but they might. That one's not a, oh is it? Maybe that is a text. Yeah, that's a text remote. A lot of these TVs you could actually buy it as a upgrade option. I think they gave you a different remote, the teletext board, the connector, and you could solder that in, plug the board in and put the different remote on it and away to go. But possibly you'll have to go into service mode. I forgot, I was going to check that before I started this video and forgot all about it. But see if there's, I didn't see it when I went through there, but double check whether there's an option to set text. Or it may just be that it is a thing the microprocessor can do, but you've just got to have a remote. It's just assuming it will never receive that code, so there's no real reason for them to block it inside the options of the microprocessor, but they may have done so. Oh, we've got some, oh, something's happening. Even when I point it at the thing, let's go to text, nothing unfortunately. Button's putting out a code, so maybe it is turned off in the, oh yeah, this is doing most of the other stuff by the look of it. So the teletext options might have been turned off. So that's picture, select the mode. Yeah, so that's a shame. It would have been nice, that would save actually putting a switch in there. Not that it's the end of the world, but it would be interesting to see whether you can actually save having to wire up a switch and make it so that a remote control will do the switching for you. Because that microprocessor should switch the blanking line on when it's in text mode, which is all you're doing is forcing the TV into that mode, or the Philips chip to think it's in teletext mode. Yeah, that one works and doesn't do a thing. Power button doesn't work. But that doesn't seem to work either. Well, this is a pretty grotty one, so you know most of the buttons aren't doing anything. She's a rough old one. Same remote as the other, I think. Anyway, they are RM870. Yeah, the same remote. So there's no point trying a second one that's in poorer condition. And I've got another one here, and it's also an RM870, so they're all the same. So there must have been a few, maybe some of the 21 inches or whatever with that teletext option. And luckily I've managed to pick up 3 of those remotes, so they're going to need some work. I might just try this later one. Whether it'll even run this Sony is a whole other thing. Yeah, it's doing something. I think that's the text option, so I'd say text has been that one with the bands on it. Just check that button is working. It is. Does the power not work on any of these? Yeah, now the power button's stuffed. Digital analog, so this is even a later, this is more like an LCD or plasma or something. So it shows they use the same codes, which is good. Ooh, what happened then? I must have pressed channel 2. So it's got a lot of extra stuff on here. Internet video, well that's definitely not an old school analog remote. So I'm going to go and check the manual, because it would be nice if we could go into the service menu and turn that option on, and then just change the remote, since I don't even have an original remote for this TV, which would have been something like this one. Yeah, they had something green around, some had green buttons I think, and some of that green patch around it. The power button, that's an RM849S. Not necessarily originally for this model. Not sure what A/B is, but that may not be a function for this TV. But generally any of these Sony remotes will work, and even sometimes some of the silver ones. Might even dig a couple of those out and try them later. But we'll have a look what it says about the teletext, whether I can find that. Well, looking at the manual, this 870 remote actually is the correct one for this model. So it came with the text stuff already attached. It looks like the 14... So this is a KV14S1, and the GS11 is the text model. But I can't see any options. Some options to change to stereo mono, different countries and stuff, which could explain why one of these has a few extra bits up on the menu regarding the audio that don't seem to necessarily do anything, and probably don't belong on this mono set. So maybe that's been changed in the server settings, but it doesn't seem to be an option for teletext. So I don't know how the TVs, they just show all these model numbers, the 1 and the 11, under the same settings for the Australian country code settings and options, what the options are for Australia. And then there's some other country options where they change a couple of 1s and 0s in the settings. But nothing to say how the text actually works, unless this microprocessor realizes the text board is in there from the data line, clock and data, sending some sort of signal to it or something. Is about the only thing I can think of, is when you plug the board in and it's powered up, it communicates with the microprocessor and it knows it's there. That's about the only other option, because I would have thought there'd be an option in the processor to actually make it into a teletext model or not. So unfortunately it might not be as simple as a setting, so we may have to put a blanking pin on this thing. And there is something about, there is a timer option or something, time on delay or something, which could explain why this one's also doing the slow startup with the blinks. Well, I don't know if it's actually any slower than the other one, but I suspect it might be a little slower. I think the other one's on by now, so maybe that's another setting that someone's got at. Very hard to know. But might have a quick look inside this thing anyway. But good news is I've bought 3 remotes for these TVs, even though I've only got 2. And yeah, of course, got these other more basic remotes. That really is more of a correct remote for this in a way, because it doesn't have the teletext stuff, but that's rather weird. I thought maybe they had 2 different remote options, and it could even be the case that the teletext blanking could be set and go into teletext mode by using the correct remote with the correct buttons, but that doesn't seem to be the case. Nice and easy to get the bits. And is that our text connector? Yeah, CN106, I think that was the one. And there are a few resistors to ground. I'll have to look at what number they were, where the RGB goes in. Possibly they're not the right value. Really want about 75 ohms. There's our TDA chip. A little bit of corrosion and stuff in this thing. Yeah, this is the model with the... Which model is it? A SDR6707 IC. Definitely worth checking the capacitors around that, but I don't think they ran quite as hot in these. That would be our LA7830 or something. Yeah, 7830 vertical output. So I think probably that capacitor down in under the heatsink there, or one of these other ones. All worth a check. And yeah, there's a cap behind the heatsink of the IC there, another one there. I had a feeling there was 3 in them, but maybe it was only 2. Yeah, just 2 caps in the primary besides the main filter cap there. They are definitely worth a check. As a switch, it looks like a power switch, looks a bit like a Philips one that used to fail, but I don't think the switches failed in these. We've got an A34 JBU70X tube, and like most Trinitrons, still a thick diameter tube and quite deep. I've got some stuff written on the side there on a little sticker. Just repeats the model number and serial number. And yeah, there wasn't a lot more to them. Bit of rust on the tuner, so this one hasn't been stored in the best conditions, but I think one of these, I think this was the one that was covered in dust and filth, so it looked like it'd been sitting in a garage for quite a while, or some sort of shed or outbuilding. Don't think they got a lot in the way of dry joints in these ones, but the bigger ones possibly. I know this area around the power supply here and the vertical tended to run hotter in the bigger ones, the 20 inch. I'm not sure if they made it even bigger. I think there was a 25 model mentioned in the manual. Not sure if they went as big as a 68 or anything with these type of chassis. Often they'd have more features and stuff, so they'd have a different chassis in the larger sets. So that's the TDA chip. I forget which pins were the RGB input. Could be that later stuff there. And in the manual they show the teletext connections coming across with blanking and RGB going into a line, and the draftsman's just used a single line, but when he gets to the other end he only shows the blanking hooked to the chip, but I assume the rest of it's hooked up as well. Might just do a resistance check. So it's those top 3 there. We can go to our tuner for ground. We've got 150 ohm. I think these might have 150s to ground. It shows at the chip end they've probably got resistors to terminate it, regardless of whether teletext is there or not. Putting the teletext board in probably does bring it back more to 75 ohms or something. And where's the blanking? I don't know if that's got a resistor. Blanking, I think that was the one next to them. That doesn't really matter. But we could put another 150 ohm resistor to ground on each of these lines somewhere to get that down, because I think they're little surface mount resistors here somewhere. Surprised they're not obvious, but they could be mounted away from the chip somewhere. Like those 2 there. So you can just add other resistors to get the parallel resistance down. Probably going to be the easiest way. I assume there's a ground line here somewhere. Oh, the ground is after the blanking. And there we have an RGB signal, so pretty easy to mod these. You got to use the composite video in for sync, of course. just composite video of them using the pattern generator at the moment, which has sync on a separate line. And go to AV input, because if you don't, we've got no sync. We just got the RGB colour signals going into the chip, but no sync. But as soon as we go to video input, it does have a little bit of bending at the top. Maybe there's a little bit of video issue somewhere on this thing. Could be a geometry issue. So it's not quite perfect, but nice colours on it. And yeah, that definitely bendy at the top. A little bit of convergence issues, probably could do with a slight tweak. A little bit of purity there, but I think it's just because I moved it round after turning it on. But yeah, very nice looking image there. So I'll show a few details of how I modded that. Very easy to do. It's basically just a teletext board. And yeah, just the usual, you've got RGB inputs, you've got a blanking input, which has to be switched to between, was it about 1 and 3 volts. Usual Philips chip type setup. And yeah, just wire that in. And you've got to use a bit of a voltage divider because we've got 5 volts at the board. Blanking at the board, RGB, so basically this empty connector can be used for everything. And yeah, I've just temporarily done a bit of mess here. Got a toggle switch there to switch the blanking on and off. Get it back into normal TV mode. And that's the sync in this case, but composite input. We'll try hooking up the PlayStation as well. And I've just used an audio type 4-way connector there. Just for temporary purposes. You've got 150 ohm resistors to ground on that TDA chip, so you've got to put some more 150, either replace them. But I think there's surface mount, so easier just to put some 150 ohms in parallel with them, which halves it down to 75 ohms. I've just soldered them onto the sockets themselves. And I've just got a resistor coming out of, yeah, it's the 5th one along, is labelled ST-BY, so standby. That's your 5 volt line on the actual teletext board. 3 down the end is the RGB, and then blanking on top of that, so there's 4 pins. I guess we'll have a quick look. I should turn this thing off. But on that, that's the connector there. CN106, that's where your teletext board's meant to plug in. So the first pins from the top down, when we've got the TV face down like this, is RGB. I think in that order. Yeah, red, green, blue. Then that's the blanking. So that's what you need to switch 1 to 3 volts into. A blanking pin, then below that we've got ground. Then above that is ST-BY, which is where I've got the other wire to the switch. I've got a resistor on the other side of the board. I've also dagged in a resistor to make a bit of a voltage divider here to go from our blanking pin to ground. That's another ground pin, just so I didn't have to try and go the one right next to it. Ideally you put everything on the top of the board, of course. I just did it on the bottom because it's easier to solder to, and they're pretty tiny holes, so I didn't fancy trying to poke the wires through unless I'm going to do it permanently. And yeah, I still think you could probably remove this socket assembly and maybe bend the pins or something so they don't go through the board, or cut the tracks on the board, and actually use those other 3 sockets for your RGB input rather than adding a whole new set of sockets on the back of the TV and drilling holes in it. You're still going to have to put a switch in, which is a shame. Would have been nice if we could have worked out to get the remote to do that. But I've currently got a 470 to ground, and what is that, 180 ohms to the 5 volts, I think, to standby. It's a little on the low side still. I think it's only 1 point something volts. So that 470 probably needs increasing a bit. I mean, you could just use two resistors of equal value to get exactly half. And I did have a look, there's a 7 volt line on here. And I thought, oh, 7 volts, that's not too far off 5 volts, I'll use that. But when I measured it, it's about 16 volts on there. That goes into the 9 volt regulator somewhere. It's shown on the circuit as 11 volts out of the power supply, but it was up to 16. Whether that gets a bit more loaded down in some modes or something, I don't know. But I thought we'll give that one a miss since it's unregulated. But basically take your 5 volts, divide it in half roughly. In theory you could just probably use one resistor into the chip, but I'm not sure how much sort of current that draws. It must draw something. We could just have the 5 volts through a resistor, get switched directly to the blanking. But that's about all you got to do. A few resistors, your 75 ohms across the sockets. You could do them across the board, but they're these little, I think that might be these ones down this side. There's a little isolating cap and some resistors going into the chip, but they're all surface mount. And yeah, trying to solder across surface mounts and stuff's a pain. So easier just to add them here. I mean, you could add them to the board here somewhere as well. Now as far as the power cord, I'll just remove that little clamp bit off it. I think I'll put a new one on. I can probably pop these pins out. You can just solder to the board or even to the pins of the other side of this connector. But if we press on those little links and pull on that bit, we should be able to get them out. And the neatest way to repair them is actually reuse these. You can just undo the little clamp bits on the end there where the plastic goes under. Probably some smaller cutters would be better. And that way you can get all the plastic out of there, pull your wire up, cut it off, and then you just tin that bit there with the soldering iron. Put the new wire in. You'll probably have to clamp round the actual copper bit, but that way you can reassemble that and put everything back the way it should be. Not that it really matters. And the other choice is you could splice something on inside, a couple of those crimp things that you push the wire up into, twist the wires together and crimp them, and they're well insulated. Something like that, but we'll just put a new, but I'm just going to put a new figure 8 cable on there, or one of these modern sheaths to what was a figure 8 once upon a time, and I'll put it into that connector so it can easily be unplugged again. But like I say, it doesn't matter that much. Better get that other pin off before I throw this in the scrap bin. But yeah, just peel the little clamping bits off and you just squash them back down over the new cable. Won't be as neat as originally crimped, but that was all done in a machine somewhere. It's not like this ever gets really pulled on, unless someone's inside there messing around a bit, might move it around. But that cable clamp part does all the physical strain relief from the outside world, in case this thing falls off somewhere and the cord remains attached or whatever. That sort of stops it pulling right out of the cabinet and leaving, you know, a couple of potentially bare wires, maybe not quite as bad as that, but potentially you could end up with something like that hanging out of your power point. So I'll put a new one of those on there and put this thing back together for now. I'll get a bit more of a test run. I'll remove the RGB mod stuff for now. Maybe I'll convert them back. Gonna have to decide what I'm going to do with all these things. I wouldn't mind getting a bit of a display going first, but I don't think I really need 2 of these. Probably don't even need 1 of them. Though I would like at least 1 Sony Trinitron in my collection. I guess keep 1 curved Trinitron portable, unless something better turns up. I've got 1 large one, and I've got a flat screen Sony as well, which we'll look at soon. For now, I'll just get the cord on it, get it working again and usable, and we'll worry about the rest of it later. But very nice little TV, these. Besides, like I say, the 21-inch versions had a bit of problem with the power supply. I think there was a 25 as well. Power supply vertical. Things used to run a lot hotter in the bigger screens. These little ones were normally pretty reliable. So that's all we'll do with this one for now, so thanks for watching.